أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا الربا أضعافا مضاعفة واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون واتقوا النار التي أعدت للكافرين وأطيعوا الله والرسول لعلكم ترحمون وسارعوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنة عرضها السماوات والأرض أعدت للمتقين الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين والذين إذا فعلوا فاحشة أو ظلموا أنفسهم ذكروا الله فاستغفروا لذنوبهم ومن يغفر الذنوب إلا الله ولم يصروا على ما فعلوا وهم يعلمون أولئك جزاؤهم مغفرة من ربهم وجنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها ونعم أجر العاملين. I think let's stop here. It will be difficult to finish all these verses in one day. Let me read first the translation. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا الربا أضعافا مضاعفة واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون. O ye who believe, devour not interest involving multiple additions, and fear Allah that you may prosper. And fear the fire which has been prepared for the disbelievers, and obey Allah and the Messenger that you may be shown mercy. And hasten towards forgiveness, from your Lord, and the paradise whose value is the heavens and the earth. It is prepared for the God-fearing. The word value can be also replaced by the word expanse. In fact, the word expanse is closer to the meaning of the word ard than value. That should be preferred. Value, of course, is included in that. So I'll reread the translation. And hasten towards forgiveness from your Lord and the paradise. You should hasten both to forgiveness from your Lord and to the paradise, which in fact represent the same thing. And hasten towards forgiveness from your Lord and the paradise whose expanse is the heavens and the earth. It is prepared for the God-fearing. Those who spend in prosperity those who spend in prosperity, I'm sorry, that's quite right. Looking back at the Arabic text now, I know why it has been translated so. Those who spend in prosperity and adversity, and those who suppress anger and pardon men, and Allah loves those who do good. Now, this verse should be read in conjunction with the previous one. Otherwise, there seems to be some answer missing. This is the description of further description of those who deserve Allah's forgiveness. They are such people, that is, those who spend in prosperity and adversity, and those who suppress anger and pardon men, and Allah loves those who do good. And those who, when they commit a foul deed or wrong themselves, remember Allah and implore forgiveness for their sins, and who can forgive sins except Allah, and do not knowingly persist in what they do. And who can forgive sins except Allah is in parenthesis. And the sentence reads on, and do not knowingly persist in what they do. It is those whose reward is forgiveness from their Lord, and gardens beneath which rivers flow, wherein they shall abide. And excellent is the reward of good workers. The first verse deals with the question of usury. The question would be raised as to why suddenly there is a total shift from the discussion of one subject to another, apparently unrelated subject. But we'll come to that later and discuss. Because if you remember, and let me repeat the verse with which we ended yesterday. In fact, all the verses which we have discussed already in the preceding ruku deal with the situation of Uhud and what passed there, and the reasons why, and the Muslims behaved in a manner, and so on and so forth. So suddenly there seems to be a completely different subject being discussed here, which is usury. But the first ruku also ended up with something in between the two, which could be a link from one subject to another. That is, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ يَغْفِرُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَيُعَذِّبُ مَن يَشَاءُ وَاللَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And to Allah belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth. He forgives whomsoever He pleases and punishes whomsoever He pleases. And Allah is most forgiving, merciful. But as I have already told you, inshallah, we'll come to the relationship question later on. But let me discuss first some important words and what other commentators have said about the difficult points of this verse. First of all, the word riba. This has been translated as usury or interest. What is riba? What is the root of the word riba? Raba yarbu, which means something which increases, which grows. So raba yarbul malo, that is, the wealth grows. And if you say arba, which this would mean that you have increased something else. The one is intransitive. The first was the intransitive form, and the second is the transitive form. From raba yarbu, the transitive verb would be arba. Ar-riba al-faidatu, any profit or excess of what you have spent would be which you get in return would be called riba. Also, the word ar-rabwa is considered to be the derivative, I mean, the root verb, root. What was the word which I proper grammatical term I've forgotten? The root word from which the word riba is derived is also described to be a rabwa, which apparently has no direct connection, but in meaning, of course, it has some connection. A rabwa is a plateau, a raised place anywhere. That is called a rabwa. So, because the meaning is common, to increase, to grow, so any place which is high and tall is also derived from the same intransitive verb, the same root word, re, be, wow. These are the three roots of the words, of the word. Again, one other meaning is very interesting, which is generally not known to the people. Rabwa is our central town in Pakistan. So we know Rabwa is an elevated place, but we don't know that Rabwa also means a community, and a well-knit community for that matter. So in Al-Munjad, Lisan, Mujam, Al-Wasit, this has also been mentioned that Rabwa means a large, important, strong community. Al-Arzul Murtafa, I have already explained. Ar-Rabwo also means dhiqun nafs, that is asthma or shortness of breath. What relationship it has with the meaning of elevation or anything? In fact, when you go to higher altitudes, you are always in danger of losing your breath, and shortness of breath is related to high altitudes. So that is why in Arabic, apparently different meanings belonging to a single word have really deeply connected with each other in final analysis. You can always find some definite link in the meanings of these words, which apparently are different. Rabba is also used in the sense of Rabba, from Rabubiyat. You say Rabbahu, which means you brought something up, looked after it, and made it grow under your benign patronage. But also Rabba has the same meaning, because Rabba is connected with something which is lifted, which is raised in status and things. So what does it mean here in connection with this verse? This is the question. It is believed that money increases with the passage of time. It should increase. Otherwise, there would be no usury, no interest. So this concept related to the money has given birth to the institutions of usury. If you part with your money, which may have been lying idle with you without giving birth to other uh, monetary children, still when you pass it on to somebody else for usage, you give it on the consideration that money should grow. That is why once Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in response to somebody why usury was forbidden, instead of answering the question, he made a counter question. He said, does your money give children, give birth to children? So that was the point which he was referring to. The central point is, money by itself has no power to grow. But because there is a false notion attached to money that it should grow, So whenever people passed on money for usage to others, they, under this false conception, they thought that they should get more in increase. So the Holy Quran rejects this idea. The Holy Quran, in fact, proposes a completely different concept about money. The Holy Quran says that if you employ money to exploit poor people, then money has the quality of decreasing in value rather than increasing. It's a very deep economic, there is a very deep economic wisdom in this, which I have discussed elsewhere, but I don't think there is time for me to enlarge upon this anymore. But remember that Quranic concept is completely opposite to the generally known and accepted economic concepts about the quality of money, or the capital, as you may call it. Capital in Islam is an inert thing, basically. Wedded to human values, it has possibilities both to grow or to lessen and decrease. The resultant would depend only on the person who is employing money and using it to his advantage or disadvantage. So money is an inert value which is neither plus nor minus. Only when it is wedded to human values, then it could either produce and grow more, or lose and become less. So riba is something, a name, Arabic name, which is uh, related to growth, but the Holy Quran does not accept it. In another place, it makes it very clear that this notion is not acceptable. But anyway, the name is such. Adafa mudafa is the other word. Adafa means to double up, to multiply, to grow rapidly. But mostly it means doubling and redoubling, of course. So, although there is a paradoxical connotation in the word dwad and fe, from used this is the root word, because dawfa means to weaken. He weakened and grew old, like Chima Sahib has grown old, but he has not weakened. So he is a good example of this paradox. Dawfa, but becoming stronger instead of growing weak. So dawfa shao, something which became loose and enfeebled, and like the old people's flesh is loosened, lax, and it doesn't have that strong strength left in it as it had in the youth. But at the same time, when you use the word with different inflection, it has exactly the opposite meaning. Dafa shaya atbaqa ba'dahu ala ba'din wa thannahu ka'annahu dayfun wa kana dayfun, to put something, pile something up on another thing, layer upon layer, so, and bind it together so that it doubles up. Wadayfu shay means something which is increased by multiplication, by doubling. Adaf is the plural of the word of dayf. So this means do not eat. The translation would be, do not eat interest or usury, which goes on doubling and increasing in mass and volume, and has the unlimited possibility of growth. So adafa mudafa means not only doubling up, but a continuous process of doubling it, endless process of doubling up, which has no limit. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, and fear Allah. The word taqwa is already well known to Muslims in general and Ahmadis in particular, so I don't have to further explain it here. Imam Razi has, as far as the relationship with the previous verse is concerned, Hazrat Imam Razi uh, has quoted Tafsir Fathul Qadir, Imam Razi, as well as Tafsir Fathul Qadir and Shawkani declare in one place that this is a completely new subject taken up by the Quran. It has no relationship with what has passed. But at another place, Imam Razi has a different view to present. He says, of course, it has a connection with the previous verses. And here, Qafal is quoted. Qafal is one of the very astute commentators of the Holy Quran that I have read. He comes out with a most beautiful and ingenious idea, which has proved to be absolutely correct in the history of modern warfare. He says it has a very genuine, deep connection with what has passed before, because the idolaters, before going into wars, used to employ their money for collecting interest on the loans, and it was mainly the interest which was used to feed the war requirements. So he says system of usury and interest is always connected with warfare. So because the idolaters had done that, and apparently they had borne all the costs of coming all the way from Mecca with such pomp and power and such number and force. So this may have given the false idea to the Muslims that if they want ever to retaliate, they should follow their example and do the same thing. So that is why a timely reminder is given to them that don't ever contemplate exploiting the poor with by lending money to them or for the sake of interest, even in good cause. Even for jihad, you're not permitted. So this is a very sensible connection, of which we'll speak again. Most of the commentators have gone about describing the nature of the crime. If a Muslim commits this crime of indulging in interest, either giving or taking, some scholars have gone so far as to declare it as kufr. And they say any Muslim who indulges in any financial dealings which are based on usury terms, etc., or interest, he should be considered pakka kafir, and he has nothing to do with Islam. Some others have taken it more slightly lightly, but consider it to be among the major sins. Now, the subject of discussion, the emphasis, much emphasis is laid on the word adafam, on the phrase adafam mudafa. Some scholars have gone to interpret, have chosen to interpret this as a condition which would make a financial dealing either haram or halal. They say interest in itself is not forbidden. What is forbidden is a form of interest, which is adafa mudafa, which means which multiplies rapidly and mercilessly. So if that condition is lacking, then you can have ordinary, normal rates. You can indulge in ordinary dealings of interest with normal, acceptable rates, which is not forbidden. But most scholars have completely rejected this idea, and they say this adafa mudafa is a phrase which only indicates to the ugliness of the ultimate um result of indulging in usury. He says this is what it amounts to ultimately, and this is to highlight the ugliness of usury itself. This the adafa mudafa is added to describe the ugliness. It is not a condition. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu has pointedly mentioned that usury or interest, whatever you call it, has been forbidden even without this condition separately. Declaration is clear and unconditional that this is haram. You can't do that. So the only meaning of adafa mudafa is to the only way we should treat the phrase adafa mudafa is to accept it as a further attempt to magnify the evil of usury. Hazrat Mauli Sarwar Shah Sahib has mentioned that in fact all usury ultimately ends up in adafa mudafa, whether the terms are soft or hard, because most people who are compelled to borrow money are in a poor financial state of have a poor financial standing, and most cannot pay the borrowed money on interest terms in time. So the time lapses and the money goes on increasing until the capital grows also in volume. And even if the terms are very soft, even if it's 2-3% like some international loans are, ultimately the capital increases to a degree that this 2 or 3% practically amounts to 20-25% to the as relation to as in comparison to the original sum which was loaned out. So it's very wise observation on the part of Hazrat Maulvi Sarwar Shah Sahib, who was a very deep, sound religious scholar, but who didn't have much knowledge of subjects other than religious, like economy, etc. But he was exceptionally intelligent, and his tafsir-e-sarwari, should be rated very high among all the tafasir, and I recommend those who can have access to tafsir-e-sarwari to read it. So this point was raised by Hazrat Maulvi Sarwar Shah Sahib. Now this point, the point which has been raised by Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Awwal, is obviously supported by many verses which have very strong condemnation of interest or usury, and do not mention any condition attached to that. For instance, الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَا لَا يَقُومُونَ إِلَّا كَمَا يَقُومُ الَّذِي يَتَخَبَّطُهُ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنَ الْمَسِّ. That those who devour interest do not rise except as rises one whom Satan has smitten with insanity. That is because they say trade also is like interest. So those who believe that trade also is a means of increasing one's money, so loaning out your capital to someone else should justify the same increase, expected increase. So it is type of trade, no more. The Holy Quran very strongly rejects this idea and rejects the very institution of interest, which unfortunately is getting more and more, um, I think, which I should say, which unfortunately is accepted by all the Muslim states so far, as much as I know, and which has gone deep into the financial dealings of all Muslim societies. And unfortunately, also, Ahmadis are not treating it anymore with such taboos as they used to treat it 3 decades ago, for instance, or 4 decades ago. So they are becoming lax in their abhorrence of borrowing money on interest, etc. And I should remind you that the Holy Quran is very severe on this thing. The Holy Quran uh, is very harsh in its judgment on those who take license in this regard and consider it to be an ordinary small thing. But let me return to the concept, the question of connection first, then I'll speak of these things again. Now, as far as the relationship to the previous verses, not only the verse, but the verses is concerned, I believe, I fully agree with, of course, Qafal, that usury or the institution of interest is inseparably related to big wars. A small skirmish or battle may be considered as an exception, but the institution of war as such is related to the system of usury. If you study the history of the First World War and the Second World War, you will be pained to learn that the prolongation of both these wars was only possible because of borrowing of money at high interest rates, both internally by the states involved in belligerency or externally from other powerful, wealthy sources. This is why bonds are issued so extensively, defense bond, this and that, on the promise that the person will be paid more. And also, governments borrow heavily from rich financial houses, banks, etc., from outside and from other states, etc., etc. The beneficiaries of wars are always capitalists, the wealthy people in the society, as well as those who have financial racketeering, international financial racketeering. And in both these wars, those who benefited most were the Jews, because they controlled the sources of money, the sources of capital. And both these wars were turned to their advantage to such degree that it leaves one to imagine that perhaps wars are desirable for the Jews. If there are no wars, perhaps they would be encouraged to plan and conspire to have wars, because a situation of peace is far less advantageous to them than a situation of war. Look at the question of Israel itself. Had there been no Second World War, there would have been no Israel. The British government was heavily indebted to Rothschild Jewish bank for borrowing money for their war efforts, and also to other Jewish controlled financial houses. So that is why the interest, the system of interest, institution of interest and banking are coupled with the dangers of wars, if not so initially, at least they are coupled with the dangers of wars being prolonged beyond normal expectancies. So the Holy Quran is discussing war, a situation of war, of Jang-e-Ohad. And suddenly, to speak of usury is not irrelevant. It is, they're deeply connected subjects. The second link is with the last verse of the previous ruku, which stands as a bridge between the previous subject and the subject to come. But I remind you that this entire ruku should be treated as something in parenthesis which is related, but which also stands as a sort of interlude between two subjects. And the question of war will be discussed again, and the same subject will be taken up again in general. So this interlude also is justified through relationship between what has been said before and what is yet to come after this ruku will be finished. Now this bridge which I mentioned was the verse Lillahi ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard yaghfiru liman yasha'u wa yu'adhibu man yasha'u wallahu ghafurur rahim. It speaks of God's uh, right, prerogative, authority to forgive whomsoever He pleases or to punish whomsoever He pleases. This is the ordinary meaning, and so much has been said about it and discussed in most commentaries. But I have not read anywhere that this verse, in fact, is the opening door to the second ruku. In the second ruku, which we have just started reading, everything is explained. Who are the people whom God forgives? Who are the people whom God punishes? The reasons why He forgives, the reasons why He punishes. So this is a very important subject which had to be explained. So although as such it can be taken in parentheses, but it has its own justified place here. So now let's turn to the question of usury. The usury is the worst type of exploitation of the helpless people, the poor, the innocent. And usury is a social crime, because somebody who is downtrodden and fallen and stands in need of financial help for his very survival, he would not go to asking for money for any lender to any lender if he was financially sound. Only occasionally it happens that a financially sound person or party would like to borrow money. These things are for saving income tax, etc. These measures are taken even by financially strong houses in business. But for the time being, that is not what I want to discuss. What I want to discuss is that in ordinary practice, most of the common people, most of the middle class people who are forced to borrow money from banks or from other private sources, they are always the losers. They are losers in so many ways, much more than one way. Even at the time of wars, you have just heard that the governments issue bonds on the promises that they would increase and double up in 4 or 5 years and so on. In reality, what happens is that a big fraud is played on the public of such governments by the governments themselves. By the time the money doubles up, the value of the money decreases by many factors. So, in 5 years' time, a war situation, if somebody has bought bonds, saving bonds, etc., and is expecting, hopefully, of course, that if the government stayed in power and the country didn't fall altogether, he would get his money doubled up. By that time, the value of the money could be reduced to even 1/100th of the value uh, compared to the time when he loaned it to the government. So it is a big fraud. Exploitation of the poor and the innocent and the unknowing. In private affairs also, we know that there is a system of private lending and borrowing even in such advanced countries as England. And some organizations investigated into the reasons why it happened and where it leads to. And their report is so horrifying. They say that even in a country like England, which is considered to be so advanced and civilized, usury worse than the usury which you have, is practiced by Pathans, money lenders in Pakistan and India, is being operated here in England. Sometimes some financial houses crop up and let the word pass around that we can give you immediately without any um, legal papers and preparations, etc., at 25% per 3 months. And if a small when you need a small sum of money, for instance, £100, £200 immediately, you say, all right, I'll pay £125, okay, I can use it. These are the people who fall victims to such fraudulent financial houses. And the practice is so large and so heinous that such people mostly end up heavily under debt to these organizations, and they can never wriggle out of this because of the legal implications of the agreements. So the same thing is happening in Pakistan, in India, in the third world countries, and in Sindh, for instance, in the poorest area of Pakistan, which is the Thar, where scheduled caste Hindus are, mostly is populated by scheduled caste Hindus. There are also banyas of higher class of Hindus who are money lenders. When through the work of Waqf Jadid, I visited that area for the first time, I was horrified to discover that the entire land of the populace was, in fact, had become practically the property of the moneylenders. It had been legally written down that no proprietor of the right, not legally written down, virtually it is, but legally the previous owners of the land still remain legally the owner. So I was a bit intrigued about this situation. I said, why don't the Hindus just take over the land and finish with this nonsense? Then I discovered that if they do it, this usury system of usury, the chain of usury will break. Because then these poor people have nothing to do, then they'll migrate elsewhere to other parts of Pakistan and earn their livelihood through labor. Now the land still remains in their name. So they're tied down to the same area. What happens is, whatever they produce is completely appropriated by the money lenders, because there is far more they still owe them than the entire land produce of 1 year or even many years. So they take it wholesale completely and write down in their khatas, bahis, etc., that this much has been paid back. And then they say, now how much you need for the next year to live. So they borrow on new terms part of the produce of their own land, and it is lent out to them, and the servicing of their debt goes on increasing, as well as the debt itself, to such figures as it's impossible, mind-boggling figures. Some people owe to the lenders 20, 50 times the value of their land. So they are enslaved bondage men of these money lenders. So if you are so cruel, so heartless, how could you expect forgiveness of Allah? Why should Allah forgive you when you treat His servants so inhumanely, so cruelly, and so mercilessly? So the verse يَغْفِرُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ and يُعَذِّبُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ is deeply related to what follows. Now you read again a few verses, and then you will understand the same subject is being built up. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. After a few verses, the same subject is further developed, and then comes this verse: الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Those, in fact, deserve forgiveness of Allah who spend in prosperity as well as in adversity, instead of exploiting others' adversity. While they themselves are in adversity, spend in the cause of helping others, help in the cause of goodness and in the cause of Allah, to help the poor, to mitigate their misery, instead of exploiting them. So this is the connection. And those who forgive and overlook the faults of others, even if somebody is incapable of paying back the money he had borrowed from them, they say, all right, I forgive. I don't take it. I don't demand anything. Such are the people who deserve Allah's forgiveness. So the previous question raised about why should Allah forgive anybody arbitrarily without any reason is well answered here in the following verses, and the connection becomes very obvious as you read through the ruku. The second verse, وَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ, has also been the subject of discussion on one important single point. Some scholars say that the meaning is avoid or save yourself from the fire which has been prepared for the non-believers. So some say that it is according to one scholar, I'll tell you who. Perhaps it is Imam Abu Hanifa, who says this is the most alarming verse as far as the Muslims are concerned, because this is one place where the Muslims are addressed and they are told that you should fear the fire which is prepared for non-believers. So you will not be exempted from that fire, that type of hell which is prepared specially for the non-believers. I have misplaced it somewhere. Do you remember where? Huh? Imam Abu Hanifa? Yeah, I guess quite right. Yes, it is Imam Abu Hanifa who has pointed out that this verse should not be taken lightly, because it's one place in the Holy Quran where the Muslims are addressed, and as such they are threatened with the hellfire which is prepared for the non-believers. So this has become the subject of discussion, why it is done so. But before we uh, uh, go further into this aspect, let me point out that the word annar, according to the Arabic, does not only mean hellfire, it also means war. And elsewhere in the Holy Quran, war has been promised to those who do not abstain from indulging in usury and interest systems. So here, annar should be translated as war. The prior meaning should be war, because the Holy Quran bears it out elsewhere that the punishment for those who do not abstain from indulging in usury are promised by God, that they will suffer uh, from devastating wars. So we have already seen the connection between usury and wars, and the Holy Quran also mentions that connection. So in this context, the meaning should be Wattakun narallati uiddat lil kafirin. O Muslims, you know the implications of all this. Save yourself at least from the wars which are prepared for the non-believers for their indulgence in such crimes. In fact, the capitalist system as such is potent with is potentially capable of producing wars, and the Holy Quran says it will produce wars. So no capitalist system in the world can remain much longer in peace. The capitalistic philosophy itself generates wars, and as such the Muslims are warned that we have told you of the inherent dangers of this financial folly of indulging in interest. Still, if you do not abstain from it, you will get involved in such wars which were initially prepared for the non-believers, not for you. And this is what has happened during the Gulf crisis, in fact. As I once suggested, if the Muslims, rich Muslims, oil-rich Muslim states had not indulged in um, the bank interests uh, with to be used for their own personal gains, there could not have been any Gulf War at all, because the money they get in interest, if they had spent in good cause on poorer brother Muslims and Arabs at least, if not other Muslims, this could have created such deep satisfaction, and it could have fulfilled the more than fundamental requirements of the whole area in such a manner as no ill will could prevail and could survive in this atmosphere. So I'm quite certain that if the Muslims had taken the cue from the Holy Quran in the Gulf area and around, this unfortunate war could never have occurred. That is why I advise them, that not only Muslims, the third world countries, that those who are oil rich, they must immediately decide that they will not use their interest on their wealth for purposes other than helping the poor. So if they do this and give zakat from their hoardings, the fate of the entire world can be changed, because this is the financial boost that the third world so much needs. And if you calculate the wealth and the outcome of interest on their hoarded money, and zakat on 2.5%, you'll be surprised how much money becomes immediately available for spending on the good cause. So, Wattakun Naralati here means primarily save yourself from the horrors of a war, which initially is designed for non-believers who indulge in the system of usury and capitalism, etc. وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ, and obey Allah and His Messenger, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ, so that you are shown mercy. So this is the same theme which was opened up by the leading verse of the last ruku. The last verse of the last ruku becomes the leading verse of this ruku, and becomes a bridge between the subjects previously discussed and the subjects being discussed here now. Mufadat Imam Raghib, for instance, also mentions an-narul harbo. Nar is used also to indicate wars. Now I'm just scanning through the opinions of other classical commentators. If anything is worthy of mention, I'll mention it to you. Muslim also has mentioned this, that here an-nar means war. Nothing worthy of mention is left out, so I'll turn to the next verse. وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَجَنَّةٍ عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and hasten towards forgiveness of your Lord and to the paradise, عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ, whose span or expanse is equal to the span and expanse of the whole universe, the heaven and the earth. أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, this has been prepared for those who fear Allah. So in fact, these two verses stand in contrast to each other. There a hell was mentioned or war was mentioned, أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ, for the non-believers. Here it is uiddat for muttaqin, not just believers, but those who fear Allah. They will have this heaven described here. Personally, I believe that this should apply both to the heaven which is promised after this life, in the next life to come, and also to a sort of heaven which has been promised here on this earth. My reason is that an-nar has been translated, acceptably translated, in two ways. One meaning of an-nar is applicable to this world here, and the other meaning of an-nar is applicable to the world, the next world. So also this verse, which stands in contrast to this, should have both these two applications. One application for this world as against the nar of war, And the second application for the next world to come, in the sense of the heaven as we understand, which is promised to us in the life to come. So in the first sense of the word, سارعوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنة أرضها السماوات والأرض أعدت للمتقين means if you fear Allah, if you abstain from interest and usury, etc., then we promise that we will be able to create a heaven here on earth, which will not only be a heaven for worldly things, but it will create an atmosphere where people will become godly, God-fearing. And this would be a heaven both for concerning the matters of this world and concerning the matters of religion as well. So a climate which is generated from capitalistic system is not promotive to the type of heaven which is visualized in the Holy Quran, not only for the next world but for the world here on this earth. The heaven which has been mentioned in connection with Adam's first heaven, that heaven has been described as a place on earth where the basic needs of man are guaranteed. لا تزمع فيها ولا لا تجوع فيها ولا تجوع فيها ولا لا تجوع فيها ولا ترى ولا تزمع فيها ولا تضحى. A place where you have neither hunger nor thirst, nor living open in the sky without a shelter, or a place where you are not deprived of your basic rights to clothing and a shelter over your head. This is the heaven described in relation to the first heaven created by the first prophet of God. So this heaven also applies to this world, but this is a far more advanced heaven than the heaven visualized in relation to the time of Adam. This heaven is in relation to the Sharia of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the difference between the two descriptions is like describing a crude rudimentary form of living to a highly organized and civilized and advanced living with full amenities. So the Holy Quran here is pointing out that if you abstain from usury and destroy the capitalistic philosophy and system and stick to the values of the Quran as far as the economic system is concerned, we promise you that the whole mankind will be ushered into a new era where the life here on earth would become heavenly. It would be a heaven which would extend all the spheres of human activity. The meaning of as-samawat wal ard in this relation would be which would cover all their activities, spiritual, religious, material, social, etc., etc. So this should be the first meaning of this verse. سارعوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنة أرضها السماوات والأرض أعدت للمتقين. As I have already explained in context with the previous verse, it means for the creation of economic, social heaven here on earth based on Islamic principles of absolute justice and fair play. And secondly, this verse applies to the heaven to come, in the world to come, in the life to come. In that context, the word nar would also be translated as hellfire. So when we translate it as war, we do not mean that we obviate the translation of hell. Both apply at the same time, simultaneously. So nar is promised to the Muslims who do not abstain from cooperating with the financial systems of the world which play havoc with the peace of human beings and which exploit the poor and create ugly situations of artificial famines, hunger, and misery, etc., etc. So anybody who helps and promotes such systems, cruel systems, is warned that you may suffer also the punishment which essentially and originally is prepared for the non-believers. Some other interesting points about these verses. This verse are discussed by different scholars. First of all, why sareu ila maghfiratin min rabbikum? Why hasten towards this? Elsewhere, this is not mentioned in connection with other ordinary human conduct. That why should you hasten? Of course, uh, in connection with man's relationship to God, the same type of phrase is employed. For instance, firru ilallahi, run towards God and seek His shelter and His nearness. But in ordinary life situation, this expression has not been used elsewhere except here. It says, "Sareu ila maghfiratin min rabbikum wa jannatin arduha samawatu wal ard." Hasten towards forgiveness from Allah and that heaven which has expanse extending as big as which has as large an expanse as the universe itself. Sareu perhaps is mentioned because a situation where the needs of the poor is ignored, where they are abandoned without anybody showing mercy to them, where instead of trying to improve their lot, they are further exploited and made further miserable until the very life becomes a misery, a prolonged misery for them. This is something which incurs Allah's wrath, where Allah will not wait for you to die and come to Him before He punishes you in toto as a whole. So the war punishment here will take place here on this earth, and also other sorts of punishments. The life of the rich would also be made miserable somehow and restless and without peace. So the whole society would suffer if you do not hasten to redress your own follies and continue to indulge in such financial systems where the poor are continuously being robbed of their due rights. The other point of discussion has been arduha samawat wal ard. Some people say ard means the breadth, and length is not mentioned, so they take it too literally. They say this means that the breadth of the heaven is as much as the entire universe. The tawalat or the length is not mentioned because the universe is shorter in that direction. So there are two planes, breadth and length. So they say only length, breadth is mentioned because the Jannah is much longer, although equal in breadth to this universe. The others, of course, take a different view. They say, no, ard also means the size, the general expanse of something. It's not necessarily the breadth. So it covers both the length and the breadth simultaneously. There is a third view that ard also means value. And that also is applicable, and it's a very interesting addition to the connotations of the world Ard. In this context, it would mean that hasten to the heaven which in value is as great as the whole universe. So why to have a very disadvantageous bargain for the sake of the interest money, which is small and meaningless as compared to the value of the whole universe? You are jeopardizing your gains, your rewards to a degree where it would be just madness for you to continue indulging in this crime. So the Holy Quran says the value of Allah's maghfirat, His forgiveness, and the value of the Jannah which He has in store for you is as big as the whole universe. So that is one meaning. Others have raised the question of taking literally the words expanse. Those who agree, who believe that both breadth and length are mentioned here, the entire size is mentioned, they wonder if this is Jannah, where the hell would be, because all the space is covered by Jannah and there is no space left for hell to survive anywhere. So they in fact think in the ordinary 3-4 dimensional terms, and they don't know that there are more dimensions to existence, to the forms of existence. Already the mathematicians have worked out 14 or more dimensions in mathematical hypothetical possibilities. The 3 or 4 dimensions known to us are not all the dimensions to existence. There are other possibilities. And you will be fascinated to learn that this is exactly what the answer was. This is exactly what Hazrat pointed out when he was confronted by such a question. It is reported that the representative of Hirqal, Kaisar, was at Medina when perhaps close to that period this verse was revealed. So he was a bit stupefied by this because he was taking it literally in the ordinary dimensions. So he said, pointing to this verse, he asked Hazrat, I have heard that you invite people to a heaven which is prepared for the God-fearing people, whose expanse is equal to the entire universe. My question is, where the hell would be if the heaven covers the entire area, entire space? The answer was, Subhanallah, Allah is free from all defects. When there is day, where does the night go? The same space. So there is day, there is night. You know, he pointed out to different possibilities. He didn't say exactly that there are dimensions and other possibilities, in the form of mathematical possibilities. But what he pointed out was, it was deeper than just the question of dimension. What he said was that hell is not something substantial which occupies a place and displaces other similar things. Hell is the concept of hell, according to what Rasulullah has instructed us, is like a negative value. When there is light, there is no darkness. What is darkness? It is absence of light. it is not something which occupies something on its own merit and its own right. So what he pointed out was that hell is the possession of, now heaven is the possession of Allah's favors, His kindness, His blessings. To see with the light of Allah is heaven. When this is missing, then in the same space hell is created for you. You don't require a different space. So a very delicate and sublime meaning of heaven and earth has been pointed out by Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and still one wonders why the medieval Muslim scholars and even scholars of today consider heaven and hell to be more corporal in their nature than ethereal and spiritual. So this means that all the goodness is all that counts, and lack of goodness is what creates hell. And lack of goodness is not a substantial value in itself. Like the darkness is just the lack of light. So they don't require different spaces. If you shut your eyes in the same space, you will break touch with light and you will be in darkness. You open your eyes and in the same space you get your day or heaven, as it has been described here. So people would live in the same outward space, yet their experiences would be different. This is the message. People living in covering the souls or whatever forms they are in afterlife, they would cover the same space, so to say, but their experience will be so different that one soul would experience hell and the other would be experiencing heaven. So outward dimensions do not matter, do not count, and are not related. الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. This is the description of those people who would earn heaven, but the door to heaven is through maghfirah. The previous verse should be understood in this context, that maghfirah is mentioned first and al-Jannah is mentioned immediately afterwards. So maghfirah is mentioned in the form of a doorway to Jannah. That also implies that no one can ever enter Jannah or heaven on his own right, on the merit of his own good deeds. Maghfirah will be needed to have him shorn of his sins and their bad effects. So until he is purified by God with his forgiveness, nobody can enter heaven. And who are those people who would earn forgiveness? This is what is being discussed here. And it is also related to the verse which I have pointed out repeatedly, the last verse of the last ruku, the previous ruku. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ, whose conduct is exactly opposite to the conduct of materialistic people, those who conform to the capitalistic views. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ. Now this is very important. It mentions that those people who spend not only in prosperity but also in adversity. Now if you have a borrowing habit, if you have a style of life where you can't live within your means. How can you spend in adversity? So, this is the greatest compliment that could be given to the Muslims, of their uprightness, of their being content with whatever God has provided them, and to live within means, such as the people who would neither beg from others nor borrow money. Otherwise, it's impossible. The situation cannot be conceived. So then, if a society is created of such upright, God-fearing people, the system of usury and interest would automatically collapse. Nobody would go to the lending houses, because such poor people would be in search of places where they could spend in the cause for the sake of others, rather than to the lending houses to borrow money, or to to such um, societies who give money. I mean, give money by way of alms and distribute it to the poor, etc. So they won't need any such things anyhow, either temporary or permanent. So this is very important. This is why I once issued a sermon on the question of qanaat. Ahmadis must pay attention to this qanaat. Lack of qanaat compels them not only sometimes to beg, but also to borrow, even on interest. And they say, we don't have this, we don't have that, we need for this and we need for that. So, are we not justified now to be considered helpless, compelled to borrow money on interest? So, sometimes I can't argue with them, I pity them, but I know this is wrong. This is wrong, but justified only because, first of all, they have to rectify their style of life. And they don't come to me for such sermons. They come for a quick answer, this or that. But here is the verse of the Holy Quran which throws ample light on the whole philosophy of the financial relationship. If the Muslims, the Holy Quran tells us, are upright people, if they learn to live in adversity, not only that, despite adversity, if they desire to spend on others and help others, this would be the first brick for the creation of heaven on earth. Otherwise, no heaven and earth can be built. And this is exactly what happened at the time of the holy founder of Islam. The poorest people of the society, the poorest section of the society, wanted to spend rather than to beg. They were so upright that some would even face death instead of begging to remove their hunger, to appease their hunger. So once a party from among them approached the holy founder of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and expressed their deep dissatisfaction, not at their poverty, but at their being unable to spend in the cause of Allah. They said, we are so poor that when we see other healthier sections, more fortunate sections of the society to spend on good cause, to respond to your calls of spending in the cause of Allah, we go through hell, suffering, deep suffering within us. We can't do it. So they took advice from Muhammad, but what we know is this, that they started going out to the woodlands and cut wood, bring that back to the township, and whatever proceeds they received from from selling of such wood, they would give as alms to the other poor people, while perhaps they were the poorest in the society. Not necessarily alms. There were national requirements, national needs. The enemy could borrow money on interest and could amass enough capital for wars. The Muslims could not. So all the source of the income was based on the quality of the society. If the society was of such high quality as being poor, it could spend on good cause, only then Islam could survive. And this is exactly what Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did produce on earth. So these poor people would do hard labor, not for the sake of improving their lot on earth, for getting more amenities, but to be able to spend in the cause of Allah. If you remember the history of Tehreek-e-Jadid, you will also recall to mind that there hundreds of such wonderful episodes developed and such things happened. Hazrat Muslim Maud has many a time mentioned these things, fascinating experiences of poor people who would add to their source of income by putting in hard extra labor, like people here do extra work and get extra time payment. So they did it only for the sake of being able to participate in Tehreek-e-Jadid. So this is the life force of Jamaat Ahmadiyya, this character. And we cannot build a heaven on earth here either for ourselves or even dream of building it for the whole world unless we promote these basic qualities of life. So this verse is highly important and very strongly bonded and connected with the whole subject. A society like this will prevent wars. If countries, poor countries, are made up of such stuff as I am describing, as the Holy Quran has described, then they would never turn to international financial houses or big powers like America, Russia, etc., for borrowing money on heavy interest, etc., and go completely under them and get totally enslaved by their policies. They'll be free, upright people. They will learn how to live on roots if they can't get crops bearing wheat or rice, etc. In Africa, for instance, they have enough roots to live by. But basically, first the character is necessary for building such a society and such situation. Wars would become obsolete, meaningless. This imperialism will fall on its own suprastructure. It will collapse because there will be nobody else to rule, because poor people are ruled by their bad habits and their defective attitude to life, by their greed, by their sensitivities to other friends or relatives and the countrymen, etc. So in the end, I'll remind you that in Qadian, Hazrat Muslim Maud tried to build such a society. And once somebody who came perhaps as representative of Gandhi or Nehru, I think it was Gandhi, who asked him about the liberation of India and pointed out, it was a lady, I think, she pointed out that when you do not believe in non-violence or violence, how would you get India liberated? The answer was, the essence of the answer was, that I believe in the liberation of man first. If man is liberated from the bondage of his own sins and follies and greeds and avarices and this selfishness, etc., such a liberated people can never be ruled by outsiders. They are the true free people. And he said, look, go at Qadian, go around its streets and see for yourself. You won't find any police presence. You won't find the presence of government agencies in any form except nominally, only to be formally there. Why? Because we are a liberated people. He said, you are talking of in India of 40 crores, 400 million. Give me 200 million Ahmadis of this character. and the British will be forced to abandon India and go back to their homes. So this is the message of this verse. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ. They deserve Allah's forgiveness, and that forgiveness would be a doorway to heaven, not only in the hereafter, but here on this in this world. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ, and they control their angers. They are not ridden by their angers, they ride their angers and control them. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and they overlook the follies and faults of their fellow human beings. وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and it's not just a question of forgiveness. Allah loves such people who show kindness to others and who do good deeds. So, unless I've discovered something else which might have been mentioned, omitted, from next dars we'll turn to the other verses.